This presentation of the PTE Academic will deal with speaking, Retell Lecture. As an overview for this task, this presentation will attempt to cover the following topics: test instructions, test procedure, test-wise or things you should know for this task, how this presentation will proceed. So I'm going to give you a slide. I'm not going to give any commentary. You're going to do practice. We're going to talk about the noun clause, give you 2 practice examples, and then there'll be a conclusionary reminder, as I call it. These are the test instructions. You'll hear a lecture for 60 to 90 seconds. After the lecture, you'll have 10 seconds to organize your ideas. Then you must speak into the microphone and retell what you have just heard from the lecture. This is called, in a grammatical term, reported speech. You'll have 40 seconds to complete your response. This is the test procedure with some notes. Now, before the audio recording starts, you get an image on the page. So you can look at the image, and sometimes this will suggest what the topic will be. When the recording starts, the topic will always be in the first sentence that the speaker says. So you have to listen. Right off the start, you have to be very critical. Listen to what the person says in the first sentence, because like a paragraph, this is going to be like a topic sentence for what they're talking about. So that topic will be right there. Okay, and this is important for your procedure that we're going to talk about in a moment. So you write down the topic, and then you write down 6 or 7 keywords from the lecture. You don't have to write complete sentences. That's probably an error. You won't have enough time. You just need to understand the gist of what they're talking about and write down 6 or 7 keywords. Now, in Retell Lecture, you're only going to get one speaker speaking. When we get to summarize spoken text, you have to remember that we're going to use the same procedure, but you might get 2 speakers there. You'll never get 2 speakers with Retell Lecture. So, on the second half of this page, if you look to the right, the procedure, and this should be memorized, okay? The speaker was talking about, you have to memorize that because from the first thing you wrote down was the topic, and that'll go right in there when you start to speak. He or she mentioned, plus a noun clause. He or she described, said, stated, finally, talked about. These verbs here, mentioned, described, said, stated, talked about, these are transitive verbs, okay? And we're going to talk about a noun clause in a moment, but you have to use a procedure, something like this, of transitive verbs to help you answer this question fluently. These are the things you should know about this task to keep you test-wise. There will only be 3 or 4 of these Retell lectures on the test. The recordings are always between 60 and 90 seconds in length. You can look at the image for 3 seconds and then it'll disappear. After the lecture, you only have 10 seconds before you have to start to speak. You try and speak for 27 to 35 seconds. And they say scoring is based on content, pronunciation, and fluency. But it's mostly fluency. If you do not hesitate, if you can speak through this procedure that you developed cleanly, you're going to score very high on this test. Content is really just based on 1 word for each sentence, and you'll do just fine. Hopefully your pronunciation is clear, and that'll put you in a very high bracket for this test. This is how the examples will proceed from this point in this presentation. First, you're going to get the noun clause explained, as this is the basis for answering this task, but also several other tasks if you think about it. Summarize written text, summarize spoken text, and probably the essay, you can use noun clauses as well. So you have to know this as a grammatical form. It'll really help you pass this test. After that, you're going to get some examples that follow. So the examples will run like this. First, there'll be a sound recording with a picture. When it's completed, you can stop the video and attempt your own answer. So listen to the recording and then stop the video immediately. Okay, and now you can do your own answer if you like. Second, after a few seconds then, a copy of what was spoken will appear. So the text of what was spoken will show up on your screen. It'll only be up there for 5 seconds. You might want to stop your video again here. Finally, I'll read a possible answer where the noun clauses are underlined so you can understand how you use them in your procedure. This presentation is on the noun clause in the object position. So there are a couple of things you have to understand about a noun clause, basically about verbs, okay? If I say to you, I run, you understand what I mean because this is a complete thought, a subject and a verb and a period, I run. It's also considered a sentence as it is a complete thought. However, this is an example of an intransitive verb. And the idea you're supposed to remember here is that it's a complete thought. I run. You don't have to add anything to this to make the person understand what you're saying. However, if you say I like, subject and verb, the same form, you will not know what I like because this is not a complete thought. Like is considered a transitive verb here, so something has to be added to it to complete the thought. And that's the problem with a transitive verb. You have to recognize it's a transitive verb, and then there's different ways you can complete that thought. So we have to add a direct object in most cases to complete the thought. So in this example, we say I like, and then you have to give it a direct object. Now, what you have to understand about English grammar is that you don't have to use one word as the direct object. As you can see, you can create what we call a noun clause in the object position. I think in this first example is the subject and the verb. You have a subordinate conjunction here, that, and then you just add a clause. So to create a noun clause, what follows the transitive verb is a subordinate conjunction, and then you add your clause to it. So, as I said, it's a transitive verb. In this case, the verb would be think. A subordinate conjunction, that, in this case, and a clause, which includes, a clause has to have a subject and a verb, and then whichever way you want to complete it, or use a direct object. That's yours. In here, it's a direct object, subject, verb, and direct object. The earth is flat. Okay, that's the best color coordination I can do there for you. But simply, that's the noun clause in the object position, and we'll start to show you now different ways to use it. The best way to prepare for Retell Lecture is to create your own procedure using these transitive verbs. But the thing is, memorize the pattern, because you're going to use this 3 or 4 times on your PTE exam, and you have to have some kind of procedure to get it down clean. So I've underlined on this page the transitive verbs mentioned, described, said, stated, and maybe talked about you could use. But you're not limited to these. There's other transitive verbs you could use as well. But the thing to remember is always remain fluent. Always just add one noun clause. I would say if you're going to add a second clause, you do it in the final sentence here. Also, when you do summarized spoken text, you're going to use the same procedure again. So it's another way, just add the extra clause in the last sentence. And remember, with summarized spoken text, we'll talk about later too, there's a word count, but the noun clauses really help you get to the word count that you need. So here, when you're doing Retell Lecture, memorize some kind of order or a bunch of transitive verbs that you're just going to add simple noun clauses. Within your noun clause, that'll be your key word. One of those keywords that you wrote down will situate itself right in the middle of your noun clause, and that'll keep you going. Boom, boom, boom. Step right through this and give a perfect answer with very little hesitancy. And that's what you're after to score really big. Okay, from here on, you're going to get some examples. Notice that the noun clauses are underlined in the procedure.
If you're a germaphobe navigating the city, there are certain mandatory rules of engagement. Use a paper towel to shield your hand as you touch the bathroom door handle. Lift toilet seat covers with your shoe. Touch buttons at ATMs and crosswalks and elevators with a knuckle or the back of your hand, never a fingertip. I know this because I am that person. And a new study in the journal Scientific Reports somewhat justifies my behavior, because when researchers in London sampled all those kinds of surfaces in public shopping centers and train stations and common areas in hospitals, what they found was a whole lot of antibiotic-resistant bacteria lurking there. The scientists swabbed sites all over London and ended up with 600 samples of Staphylococcus bacteria. Of those, nearly half were resistant to 2 or more commonly used antibiotics, like penicillin and erythromycin. And the hospital samples had significantly more drug-resistant microbes, which makes sense because hospitals are a place where they use a lot of antibiotics. But if there is a silver lining here, it might be how few staph bacteria were multi-drug resistant in public places, a mere 47%. Because a few years back, one of the same scientists swabbed London hotel rooms and found that 86% of the staph bacteria there were multi-drug resistant, which may not help you sleep easy.
The speaker was talking about germs. He mentioned that people lift toilet seat covers with their shoes. He described how people don't touch ATM buttons. He said that bacteria is resistant to antibiotics. He stated how there was a silver lining. Finally, he talked about how bacteria now were multi-drug resistant. especially when they are found in public shopping centers, train stations, and common areas in hospitals.
I came directly here from the deep, deep tropical rainforest in Ecuador, where I was out, you could only get there by a plane, with indigenous people with paint on their faces and parrot feathers on their headdresses, where these people are fighting to try and keep the oil companies and keep the roads out of their forests. They're fighting to develop their own way of living within the forest in a world that's clean, a world that isn't contaminated, a world that isn't polluted. There, right in the middle of this rainforest, was some solar panels, the first in that part of Ecuador, and that was mainly to bring water up by pump so that the women wouldn't have to go down. The water was cleaned, but because they got a lot of batteries, they were able to store a lot of electricity. So every house, and there were, I think, 8 houses in this little community, could have light for, I think it was about half an hour each evening. And there is the chief in all his regal finery with a laptop computer. And this man, he has been outside, but he's gone back. And he was saying, you know, we have suddenly jumped into a whole new era.
The speaker was talking about Ecuador. She mentioned that she just came from a rainforest in Ecuador. She described how the native people were dressed with feathers. She said that these people had to fight off oil companies for their forest lands. She stated that these people are developing their own way of living. Finally, she talked about how clean the water is and that there are solar panels to store electricity. The big tip in the conclusion is fluency, fluency, fluency. If you do not hesitate through this procedure, through your own procedure, through this task for approximately 30 seconds, you're going to score 90. It's mostly about fluency. I can only mention that I've probably done 1,000 of these tutorials, and I get a lot of feedback from students that have told me how they scored on their test, or they're thanking me because that's what it was all about. They got a 90 in speaking sort of thing. So try to memorize your own procedure of transitive verbs. Use mine if you like, that's fine. And use noun clauses to complete your sentences. Again, you're going to use noun clauses over and over again during the PT exam. Note 2, the subordinate conjunctions that I used throughout my procedure were always just that and how. But you can always use what, where, when, why, and who if you prefer. Depends on the information given, perhaps, in the lecture. One more thing I wanted to mention too. There is a natural pause after using a subordinate conjunction. I talked about this when we did read aloud. So, for example, if you get a sentence like this, this is where the natural pause occurs, right after that. The speaker mentioned that people should behave responsibly in public places. That pause just helps you accentuate what you're saying, and it's a natural pause, so it gives a natural rhythm, a natural way to chunk the language, if you will. But it gives you a chance to catch your breath right there, and that's what's important too, so you can keep reading fluently. As long as you are fluent and include a key word in each sentence, you're going to score very well. You're going to probably score 90. With practice, this becomes a very easy task. So the whole idea here is what I tell everybody with the PT: practice, practice, practice. Fluency, fluency, fluency. Unfortunately, that's the truth. For practice, again, you can try a tutorial with us, or you can go to ted.com/talks to listen and practice. Remember, again, use the transcript button. Good luck. You can check us out as you are on YouTube now, but also please hit the subscribe button, we're told to say. Thank you. Bye-bye. You can follow MJG Education on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Tumblr. We'll be updating that constantly, as with our homepage. We specialize in tutorials for the time being, as our website is being developed. So tutorials in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. We also do lots of mock tests that include feedback, oral feedback, if we do them through Zoom, and of course you'll get feedback in a written form as well. We like to emphasize too that we're a Canadian company. You can save 35% if you're dealing with companies that charge you in US dollars. By all means, come back and check us out. We'll save you a fortune. Anyways, thank you very much and have a nice day wherever you are.